Chase McGrath for the win for the Volunteers. From 40. On the way, knuckleball. He got it!
Top 10 team does fall. A top 10 team does fall, as well as one of my other top 10 teams. We had a couple of upsets. We had a couple of close calls, and we had a ton of midday blowouts. I am Colin Bashnigal here. Bash the CFB Show is where you can find me on TikTok. You can also find me if you want to head over to Twitter, on Twitter or X at bash_CFB, and then Twitch as well. I want to interact with you guys, so make sure that you comment down below, like, and subscribe, because opinion plus discussion equals community. Let's build a college football community. I had a comment telling me that Oregon was going to get smoked against Utah. They deleted that comment, but if you are out there, this isn't a target at you. Okay, I'm just saying, if you are out there, keep that posted. Let's talk about it. You know, that's what I would advise for you. Anybody can delete comments. I am not able to really run and hide unless I want to give up my dream. I'm never going to give up my dream, so I'm never going to run and hide. So let's talk and let's have discussions about things. All right, Kansas stuns Oklahoma 38-33. That defense for Oklahoma looked bad again for a second consecutive week. This was a rough game for the Sooners. This was one in which, you know, the result was not necessarily that surprising. It was how we got there that was a little bit surprising. So for starters, a couple of turnovers by Jason Bean. He had some big throws, but for the most part, he did not play all that well. Didn't cross 200 yards until that fourth down conversion. Devin Neal, on the other hand, played pretty well. This is a really, really good running back with Devin Neal, Lawrence Arnold, Mason Fairchild, Quentin Skinner getting involved in the pass game. But for the most part, Kansas couldn't even throw the ball, really. This game started with a pick six. Dylan Gabriel held under 200 yards himself. Basically killed any sort of Heisman campaign that he would have, and they need a ton to happen now, even with a Big 12 championship, for them to make the college football playoff, I believe, at this point. Because if you look at the rest of the landscape, we only have, I think, 4 weeks left in the college football season, and that's not including, of course, the conference championship. If you include that, we got 5 weeks left. Oklahoma's schedule going forward. Their toughest game is this weekend at Oklahoma State, who's a 6-2 football team, and props to Mike Gundy for turning it around. This is still the same football program that lost 33-7 to a G5 South Alabama, a good G5, but G5. They play West Virginia. Again, better than expected, but still. They play at BYU, and then they play TCU. They do not have a ranked team on their schedule the rest of the way. They're going to have something happen like Kansas or Oklahoma State or something. Really, you'd be better off having Oklahoma State or something like that end up ranked at 9-3 with that third loss being you, because this is going to be a tough, argument for you to be able to say, oh, Oklahoma should be in because they – in a hypothetical Big 12 championship game against Texas, beat the same Texas team twice, and that's their only ranked wins is that Texas team. Or even if they beat a Kansas State, who also could be ranked and is at the top of the conference. And the bottom line is this, too. I don't think the Big 12 is all that good. I just don't. I think that Oklahoma and Texas aren't as separated from the pack as they really should be. I think they're still better teams. You got tier one being Oklahoma, Texas, and a team nobody's talking about in Kansas State who has that switch and seems to have flipped it. And then you got a second tier of teams. You got Oklahoma State, you got West Virginia, and you got this Kansas squad who are all good enough to beat one of those top three teams, but doesn't mean they're better. You know what I mean? This picture is shaping up, and Oklahoma seems to need a ton of help to make the college football playoff at this point. Georgia stomps out Florida in Jacksonville is the headline I chose for this one. After Florida got up 7-0, this got ugly very, very quickly. Kind of like the Bears game tonight, by the way. So we take a look, and I did forget something in here, but we take a look at what happened in this game. And speaking of Heisman campaigns, look at the November that Georgia's going to have coming up. Georgia has a ranked Missouri squad at home next week. They have a ranked Ole Miss team the following week. And then the following week, they have Tennessee. A very tough schedule, but if they can go 3-0 through this and Carson Beck plays really well, put him in that Heisman conversation. We haven't seen the Heisman moments necessarily from Carson Beck, but he could have started with one on Saturday. You also could have had one back with Kentucky, in which Carson Beck, was able to light them up for 28 for 35, 389 yards. He had 4 touchdowns, did throw a pick, but a 95 QBR. And then in this past game against Florida, very similar. Not as many yards, quite as many, but still over 300, 19 for 28, 315 yards, and 2 touchdowns with an 87.8 QBR. Ladd McConkey had a massive, massive day, 6 receptions for 135. Dominic Lovett, who I told you I thought was going to be able to pop in this game, had 4 receptions for 83 yards. They both had very big days, Ladd McConkey and Robert Thomas. And this Georgia team is looking the part as my number 1 team in America. And I said I'm not moving them off of that number 1 spot until they lose a football game. They haven't lost a football game, and they haven't necessarily been too terribly close. Carson Beck is a Heisman contender just as much as a guy like J.J. McCarthy, who was off. He's killing it right now. He's killing it more than Stetson Bennett on his 2 high games that he had. He looks like a better quarterback at times than Stetson Bennett. The consistency hasn't been there. That consistency is going to probably need to be there for them to go through this 3-game stretch and then close out with Georgia Tech, who's turning out to not be a terrible team. To finish the month of November undefeated, Carson Beck is going to have a Heisman contending type of November, and I think he can get there. Utah gets dominated at home for the first loss since 2020. They lost to the Oregon Ducks. Now, this offense was always going to be fraudulent. It's the reason why I did think Oregon was going to win and honestly cover. I thought their defense would show up a little bit more than they did. But they allowed Bo Nix to absolutely light them up, and then Bucky Irving was able to get some going on the ground as well. But they didn't have a commitment to the ground game, the Oregon Ducks, until the second half. They really focused on killing them through the air. And when I talked about Utah in the preseason, I said that their secondary leaves a little bit to be desired, and that's what I worry about with them. And it got a little bit exposed. They still have played very well, but Troy Franklin having another big day, he's definitely one of the higher echelon front runners for the Biletnikoff Award in my eyes. If he is not, I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, this is bad for Utah. The sooner you could, I guess, get Cam Rising back, the better. But it looks like they're going to try to give him a medical waiver and a medical red shirt to come back for next year. We'll see what that ends up turning into. How about Notre Dame crushing Pitt? But the Narduzzi comments about the roster just being, hey, we had some good players who left, and we thought that we had replaced them, and we didn't. And a lot of people are giving him, a lot of crap for that. And I'm just going to say this right now. He's not wrong. What he said is very apparent. They've had some really good teams under Pat Narduzzi. They've won the ACC under Pat Narduzzi. Those comments to me that Pat Narduzzi had is completely correct. As far as Notre Dame goes, coming off the bye week and doing this after what you did to USC, right trajectory. You're getting Clemson now in desperation mode. If you can take care of business in Clemson, South Carolina, watch out for Notre Dame. They're probably going to be a New Year's Six team if they can do that. USC survives a shootout at California. This was insane too, because Jaden Ott had about 9 carries for 145, and 3 touchdowns with 12 minutes to go in the second quarter. That's absolutely insane. If you look at the final stat line for this, chaotic, crazy stat lines all across the board. Cal went for 2 and the win at the end of the game, and that's where they failed. Caleb Williams was up and down for sure in this game. He threw for well over 300 yards, 369 to be exact. And then Marshawn Lloyd ended up popping it after getting shut down early. And they gave the ball to Marshawn Lloyd a little bit more. They needed to do that. They needed more commitment to the run. They were very balanced to the point of they had 40 passes and 40 rushes, albeit Caleb Williams did get sacked a handful of times, but still 40 and 40. When you look at receiving wise, the best receiver this year has been Taj Washington, and it continued on that trajectory in this game. 5 receptions for 102 yards. Brendan Rice showed up for a receiving touchdown as well, but this wide receiver core is just not good. Dorian Singer had 3 receptions for 9 yards. Okay, that's not good enough. Mario Williams, nowhere to be found. Taj Washington was the best receiver on the squad, and I don't look at him as elite. As far as what they allowed to Jaden Knott in it, it ended up being a nice adjustment. He had 21 carries for 153 yards in those 3 TDs I talked about. But then they allowed for, when they did that, Fernando Mendoza to absolutely kill them through the air for damn near to 300 yards, rather. Jeremiah Hunter had a pretty big game at wide receiver, and overall, this Cal team, pretty solid. Solid showing in this one, but they've had some embarrassing losses as well. USC just looks like a disaster right now as they gear up for Washington next week. Air Force controls the game in the snow. They control the game against Colorado State, specifically in the second half with a little bit of a snowstorm. It was good to see Zach Larrier back and looking healthy, running that triple option very well. Emmanuel Michael ended up having a pretty big day himself. Also, John Lee Eldridge had a pretty good day as well. This Air Force offense is very fun to watch in the modern style of triple option that they're going with. They only threw it for 32 yards, so the identity is still there. But Zach Larrier is running this triple option with tremendous, with a tremendous type of toughness and grit and intelligence about what the defense is doing and reading that defense. Braden Fowler and Nicolosi had another pretty big day for Colorado State. This team is definitely a little bit fun, as Justice Ross Simmons had a big day. Also, Torrey Horton doing Torrey Horton stuff, but they just couldn't keep up for 4 quarters with that Air Force defense, specifically in that triple option attack. And at the end of the day, a really good team, probably the best armed forces. I'm going to proclaim this. You could talk about 2015 Navy. This might be the best armed forces team that I've ever seen in my lifetime. They are real, real good. All right, Tennessee survives at Kentucky. Real quick, talking about how they were able to shut down Ray Davis, but they allowed for Devin Leary to throw for almost like 400 yards in this game. I know this, though. When a lot of people see this, I'm going to tell you that Devin Leary was accurate and on time in this game, and it had a little bit more to do with Devin Leary than Tennessee reverting back. And at the end of the day, Devin Leary, it finally clicked with Kentucky, but we've known that this is probably the best with Barry and Brown, Dane Key, and all those guys. Tavian Robinson, this is the best wide receiver core that Mark Stoops has had at Kentucky, and it's the best wide receiver core I can recall at Kentucky. So this might not be much of a fluke this might look like a fluke, rather, to the Tennessee defense. I think that they played real well down the stretch to be able to lock up the win, and Tennessee survives at Kentucky, and that's all they needed to do. Colorado gets physically beaten down by UCLA out on the road at UCLA. The turnovers is really what kept Colorado in the game, and I'm thankful for them because Colorado ended up covering at the end of the day. But this UCLA team, their offense is pretty horrendous. They're having a little bit of identity issues at quarterback. They didn't really trust Ethan Garbers, then put in Colin Schlee. He threw an interception. They put it back Ethan Garbers into the game. They, of course, don't have Dante Moore in the ball game, and this is just a mess what they're doing on offense. And I think Chip Kelly will have it figured out in the years to come with Dante Moore, but yeah, I'm not optimistic with what UCLA has going forward for sure. Ohio State hangs on in Madison, Wisconsin. This was a game that I never really had worry about. And it's weird because I watch these Ohio State games in different lenses than a lot of people, and clearly, LOL. And from different lenses than a lot of these people who watch Ohio State football. I'm just looking at this and I'm like, this defense is great. This offense can be great. They're just handicapped by Kyle McCord, who has the arm talent to do it, mind you, but his decision-making is questionable. He hesitates a ton. He's not overly athletic. His fundamentals suck, and his decision-making sometimes sucks. Not only did he have 3 turnovers in the first half, but you go to the second half, even though he played relatively well. Let's talk about those 2 intentional grounding calls. Oh, well, the offensive line didn't block for him. No, the offensive line was fine in this game. In fact, this was one of the best games the offensive line played for Ohio State, one of the more complete games. You're looking at this offensive line for Ohio State as one that's facing blitzes and twists on those blitzes from a front 7 that is rather aggressive, front 6 that's rather aggressive from Wisconsin. And Cal McCord had there was no emergency, just quick hitter, okay? And it wasn't Ryan Day's play calling because I'd seen it for years with Stroud, with Haskins, with Fields. All of these quarterbacks were doing these things to keep them from getting sacked, and teams wouldn't blitz. CJ Stroud, Justin Fields, Dwayne Haskins was amazing against the blitz. Kyle McCord, terrible. One of the worst in Power 5 football against the blitz. The reason why? He panics. He doesn't have the awareness to be able to read a situation and make the smart decision off of it. And he makes dumb decisions, like throwing intentional ground. I have never seen and granted, I watch Ohio State closer than I do any other team, but I have never seen a Power 5 quarterback have more intentional grounding penalties than Kyle McCord has had this year, including the one that knocked them back farther against Notre Dame. He threw a strike to Emeka Egbuka, but that almost lost Ohio State the game, let alone the 2 near interceptions that he threw against Notre Dame. He gets a little bit too much credit for how good he plays sometimes in the second half, because when he's settled in the game and when the team is settled in the game, his stats look better in the second half. And they are better. He plays better in the second half for sure. Normally speaking, he's still not good. And he's the only reason why Ohio State isn't undoubtedly the best team in America. Because this defense is elite. The wide receiver core is elite. When Travion Henderson's playing like that, the run game is elite. The only thing holding Ohio State back from blowing out Wisconsin yesterday was Kyle McCord. I'm dead serious. When it was 10-0, I said to many people, it would be 28-0 if we just had a better quarterback. I don't think I was being – he threw a pick in the end zone. He was the reason we settled for a field goal for bad decision-making, and he took an intentional grounding penalty when we were in field goal range. So at the very least, like 24-0. I mean, there were so many points. Unreal how many points were left on the field by Kyle McCord, let alone the 3 points that Wisconsin stole before the half because of an interception by Kyle McCord. Terrible. I mean, it's just terrible. It's not acceptable for Ohio State football, but yet people are accepting it. It's ridiculous. I can't believe that Devin Brown is not somehow better. If Devin Brown is not better than Kyle McCord, It's a massive failure by Ryan Day, the biggest failure of his coaching career. And thank goodness that he has upgraded at every other level other than quarterback coaching. And maybe you took that in the back burner, which is why Kyle McCord's fundamentals suck, is because the development of Kyle McCord has taken a back burner to rebuilding after the 2021 Michigan loss, not last year's, because the rest of the team looks so much better. But the pieces just don't come together for Ohio State. And I just don't know. He's got the arm talent to do it, but other than the arm talent, I don't think Kyle McCord's capable of being the quarterback that is needed of winning a national championship. But we'll see. We'll see. They've won a national championship with Craig Krenzel before. I've heard that from beat reporters all dang year. I don't know if you can win it with Craig Krenzel anymore. We'll see. And Craig Krenzel might have been a better quarterback than Kyle McCord anyway. Rant over there. North Carolina drops 2 straight now to Georgia Tech after losing to Virginia last week. A pathetic defensive collapse. It wasn't necessarily Drake May's fault again in either of these losses. The defense has just collapsed, specifically when it mattered most. Allowed a comeback here against Georgia Tech. Haynes King lighting it up. It's pathetic. North Carolina getting dropped out of the rankings completely should be for everybody. This is absurd. I'm fed up with North Carolina. They do the same crap every single year that they have a little bit of relevancy. Finally, Arizona outlasts Oregon State at home. And the final score was 27-24. This was a real good game after dark. I went back and watched the second half because I did fall asleep at halftime. That's what happens when you wake up at 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m. for work. But, this was a fun game for sure. Arizona getting a big-time win. Noah Fafita looking real solid as the starting quarterback for Arizona. And this was a game I called. I thought that Arizona would be beating Oregon State when this night was over. And sure enough, they did. All right, here's a quick rapid rundown before we get out of here. Liberty stays undefeated on Tuesday night with a massive victory over Western Kentucky. I thought that was rather impressive for them. Virginia Tech, by the way, turning things around on Thursday night and really showing a lot of life. All of a sudden, even at 4-4, they're 3-1 in conference, and they're tied for second place in that conference in the ACC. All right, how about this? I forgot to mention this, but Penn State surviving against Indiana. I knew this was going to be a trap spot for them. All I cared about all week with Penn State against Indiana was if Penn State were to just win, just win and close it out. They did just that. Indiana can be a little bit stingy, but they are a terrible football team. I knew that they would kind of struggle a little bit. I thought that 31 points or whatever the spread was way too much, and I turned out to be right in that instance. Northwestern beating Maryland was massively surprising. Now, this looks like the Northwestern offense that I expected it to be. Ben Bryant was out for this game, so Brendan Sullivan came in, and he ran the ball pretty well in this game, but also he threw the ball very efficiently. Outside of the running from Brendan Sullivan, they could not get anything going on the ground. But, hey, whatever. I mean, their offense played very, very well, and the Maryland offense couldn't get anything going. The ground game was really not killing it for Maryland, albeit with not a ton of rushes and albeit with a lot of sacks. The offensive line got completely eaten up in this game. Props to Northwestern, man, on winning that game. Texas A&M beats South Carolina 30-17. Kansas State beating Houston 41-0 for Walk That Line. I went 6-6 and Walk That Line, but man, that was a lock of all locks. I knew Kansas State would put it on them, and they are definitely upper echelon in the conference. West Virginia, by the way, winning at UCF, called that one too. Not only did I take West Virginia +7, but there you go. Clemson, that collapse. Wow, just unreal. So you have a lot of Clemson fans calling for Will Shipley to get benched for Phil Maffa. Shipley gets hurt in this game. Maffa comes in, doesn't look amazing, gets a couple of touchdowns, but Cade Klubnik with a couple of bad interceptions, and again, bad receiver play for Clemson. They deserve to lose this game 100%. 24-17. Also, speaking of 42, one of the more thrilling finishes to college football on Saturday was Memphis versus North Texas. Not too many people saw it. North Texas is playing really good football on offense now. And this was one that I got wrong and walked that line. North Texas they've improved a ton. But Memphis with a last-second victory there, that was pretty epic. Texas beating BYU. A lot of people talking about the struggles of Malik Murphy. I didn't necessarily think Malik Murphy looked all that bad, especially later on in the game. But, hey, it is what it is. You know, you just got to go with it. Louisville beats Duke 23-0. Yeah, this was a pretty predictable result with Riley Leonard out. They have no offense with Riley Leonard out. He's clearly one of the most valuable players in the entire country. I shouldn't say out. He played, but not playing 100%. They ended up putting in Grayson Loftus, and it just wasn't right. Riley Leonard wasn't right. He ran 10 times for 13 yards. Did not look the same. Louisville's defense gets a ton of credit. I didn't think they'd be able to score a ton of points, so shutting down Duke's offense is exactly what they needed to do. All right, what else do I want to touch on here? Miami survives in overtime against Virginia. Miami is just not that good of a team, but Virginia is playing a lot better football. Tulane survives against Rice. They got up pretty big, and Rice tried to get a comeback there. Louisiana upset South Alabama on the road. That was a devastating loss for Kane Womack in that squad right there. Boise State stunning Wyoming 32-7. They dominated them on the Smurf turf. That was one of the more surprising results of the day. Speaking of a surprising result, Marshall getting beat like they did as well, similar to Wyoming. I know a lot of people could have thought that Coastal Carolina was going to win this game, but 34-6, my goodness, man. Troy outlasts Texas State, makes themselves a favorite out west in the Sun Belt. Of course, out east, it's a little bit murky because James Madison is ineligible. So, and Georgia State just lost. So the Sun Belt is a very interesting conference to watch for here going forward. Speaking of James Madison, they survive against Old Dominion to stay perfect, 30-27. Arizona State 38-27, a big time win against Washington State at home. Oklahoma State dominates Cincinnati 45-13, and finally Fresno State just doing it to UNLV 31-24. Two really good offenses, a pretty solid game. I took UNLV to cover 7.5, and then I ended up taking them to cover 9.5 or something like that, or 9. I knew this game would be pretty close. I will say being without your starting quarterback for UNLV definitely bit them bad, but Mikey Keene being back, not looking like his sure self, threw 4 touchdown passes even then. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Make sure you guys comment, like, and subscribe like I was just putting up there. And with that being said, we're going to head on out of here. Have a great rest of your day. I'll be back for the top 25 video later in the weekend.